morning, and thank you for joining us here.
Good morning. It's good to be here.
It's great. We're here at Elm Street Books in New Canaan, and we're here to talk about your 16th book, right?
Yes.
The Dynasty. So I want to start this morning with an admission that I am a longtime Miami fan, so that might make me a Patriots hater. John Kovacs is here joining us this morning in our mini studio, also a known Miami fan. But John and I also have the distinction of being probably the only two people you will ever meet who were season ticket holders to the USFL's New Jersey Generals team. So
I'm not sure that's something you want to admit.
I've just admitted it publicly and dragged him into the discussion. But we did get to see people, John, like Maurice Carthen, Herschel Walker, Doug Flutie play. So we got to see some good players. Today we want to talk about an NFL team who's broken all records, starting with being on the verge of bankruptcy and moving through all those years to being the greatest success story in the history of the NFL. I'd like to start and have you take me back a little first. You grew up in Connecticut. You're a Connecticut native son. You didn't set out to be a writer, but you became a prolific writer. What was the early inspiration for you to become a writer? Who were your mentors? And I know you write early on in the book about a gentleman named Art Taylor. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I did grow up in Connecticut. I was also a Miami Dolphins fan, by the way. And my trips to Foxborough once a year were to see the Dolphins play in New England. As far as being a writer, I never thought of writing as a career and a profession. And when I went off to college, my goal was to be a history teacher someday. And then I got involved in graduate school and law school, and all the while never considered writing. I've never taken a writing class in my life, and I never studied journalism or anything like that. That just tells you that I wasn't thinking about it at all. But I started writing about violence against women when I was in grad school and heading into law school, because I did a lot of research on it as a student. And I worked in a district attorney's office in Boston and worked on domestic violence. And that's where I thought I was going. But the things that I wrote academically are what opened a door for me to write commercially or professionally. And it changed my thought process as a law student when I realized, when you're a lawyer, if you're in front of a jury, you might be able to influence an audience of 12 at the most, and you might do a few of those a year. The first book that I wrote, I remember being on television in front of an audience of over 1 million people. And it just really dawned on me, like, this medium has the ability to have a much larger influence on the world than being in a courtroom and chiseling away one case at a time. And that's when I made the decision to become a full-time writer. And it certainly changed my life, because this life has been a very different one than probably had I gone with the profession of practicing law.
You had a mentor along the way.
I went to Boston to be an intern out of college. And, when you're out of college and you're trying to find your first job and nobody wants to hire you because nobody knows you and you have no experience, I decided to start with an internship, and I applied for a bunch of them and got rejected even at those. Unpaid interns, I couldn't even get one of those. And then there was a gentleman at Northeastern University in Boston who invited me up for lunch. I brought my wife, we traveled up there, and he offered me an unpaid internship doing research in his office. And that was a defining moment in my life. I didn't realize it at the time, but it completely changed the pathway that I was on. And he was somebody who believed in me early on, didn't know me well, but the thing he saw in me, I think, that attracted him to me was that I was a hard worker. Like, that was the one thing I could control, was how hard I worked. There was so many other things I couldn't control, but on that front, I could outwork anybody if I wanted to. And he saw me doing that day in and day out, and that's what allowed him to sort of give me more and more responsibility. And the reason I dedicated the Dynasty to Art Taylor is because it's amazing what influence an adult can have on a young person's life when they just put some belief in you, and how much confidence they can instill in a young person by telling you you're doing a good job. And he did a lot of that with me. He mentored me, and he would have loved this book. He passed away before I finished it, which was sad for me, but I dedicated it to him because his wife, a widow now, I knew she would read it, and I know she would see it, and it would mean the world to her.
You also wrote early on for Sports Illustrated, LA Times, so essays, features, and novels. I mean, which was the chicken and which was the egg?
I think I'd written more than 10 books by the time I started writing features for Sports Illustrated. And that was a bit of a dream come true, sort of bucket list thing for me, just because when I was a child, I wasn't much of a reader, but I did have a subscription to Sports Illustrated. And candidly, the reason I had it was for the pictures, not for the articles.
All those great Neil Leifer and Walter Yost pictures. Right?
Yeah. So to be a kid who would run home from school every day, starting in grammar school, but all the way up to high school, just to pull the magazine out of the mailbox once a week on Thursday afternoons, to go from that kid to writing stories that would appear on the cover of the magazine was a bit surreal for me, because again, that wasn't something that I had a career goal toward. But I certainly appreciated the magnitude of it when my first story appeared on the cover of the magazine. I remember seeing my name on the magazine cover for the first time and thinking, wow, like I had distinct memories of being, 10 years old and running home to get the magazine out of the mailbox, and just, really made me grateful to have gone from that to writing for the magazine.
You start the Dynasty with Drew Bledsoe in the hospital after a horrific tackle. Tom Brady hasn't started a professional game yet, so he hasn't thrown his 450 touchdown passes yet in his career. Belichick has a losing record. Kraft hasn't won any championships. And arguably the best quarterback in the NFL is close to death in the hospital. Why did you start the book here?
One of the biggest questions for a nonfiction writer, there are two huge questions going in, is where do you begin and where do you end? And those are fundamentally critical questions that a writer has to answer in his or her own mind when they start a narrative. And I actually think the beginning is even more important than the end, because it really determines whether you're going to hold the reader and whether they're going to get emotionally invested in your writing or not. And I thought really early on in this book, in my last book, Tiger Woods, we fretted for a long time about how we were going to open that one. In this book, I knew really early that I was going to open in the emergency room at Mass General Hospital in September 2011, when Drew Bledsoe gets wheeled in at death's doorstep and has a procedure to save his life, to stop the internal bleeding. But the thing that hooked me to start here was the sense of drama and almost Hollywood-like fiction that exists when he wakes up after the procedure. He's in the recovery room at the hospital, he's woozy, and when his eyes open, he's got, as you would expect, his wife sitting at one side, sort of stroking his hand the way you would expect a loving spouse to be doing. That part is very believable. But when he looks up to his left, standing over him is Robert Kraft, Bill Belichick, and Tom Brady. It's sort of like the Trinity that he sees, and he is confused. He told me he wasn't even sure what are they doing here, and because he didn't know that they were there. He'd been under medical care, and when he saw them, that was the question. It's Tommy, it's Coach, it's Mr. Kraft.
He was Tommy at that point.
He was Tommy. And the idea that Drew Bledsoe would be looking up at the future nucleus of the greatest sports dynasty of our time was so unthinkable in that moment, because Brady had never started, and because Belichick had a career-losing record, and because Robert Kraft looked at Bledsoe like his fifth son and had just given him a $100 million contract extension. That, to me, was the pivotal moment in this franchise changing directions and becoming what it would become. But it's also a great foreshadowing moment for the reader to go, wow, like if we're going to be in the hospital room with Drew Bledsoe and these guys, it tells you you're going to be in the room for this story.
And it's also not your best shot in a sense. You're not emptying
No.
the barrels here.
No.
But yet we are pulled so into this. Would you do me a favor, indulge me, and just read the opening paragraph of the prologue that I've
Sure.
highlighted there?
Sure. Wearing a surgical mask, a gown, and latex gloves, Dr. David Berger stood over Drew Bledsoe and made a careful incision in his chest. It was the evening of Sunday, September 23, 2001, and high-intensity ceiling lights in a trauma bay at Massachusetts General Hospital illuminated the 37-year-old surgeon's steady hands. Bledsoe, the starting quarterback for the New England Patriots, had an oxygen cannula in his nose and IV fluids flowing into his veins to resuscitate him. The 29-year-old had lost over a third of his blood through a partially severed artery that was pulsing into his chest cavity and preventing his left lung from expanding. Berger needed to get the internal bleeding under control, or Boston's most famous athlete would die. But first, he had to remove the blood from Bledsoe's chest.
It doesn't make you want to order lunch right away, but it just, you pull us right into the story. Immediately you strike a chord. Immediately we're connected to them and the game they play, to the people in the game they play, which I think is an important theme in this book. But I also believe, from the way you've written this and the way you've written other books, that you are there in the room when it's happening, and you weren't. But through you, we're also in the room where it's happening. How do you get to be in the room so that we can be? How does that happen?
The ultimate requirement is trust. The people that were in the room need to trust me enough to allow the reader to come in the room. And the way that happens, the only way that happens, is for me to build enough of a rapport with the folks who are in that room that they'll go a place with me in an interview that they haven't gone before. So in this case, there are 6 people who are in the room. There's Brady, Belichick, Kraft, Dr. Berger, Drew Bledsoe, and Drew's wife, Maura. And I spoke to all 6 of those people about that moment and got their recollections and their input. People have to be comfortable enough to go to these places with you, and they have to know that you're not going to abuse the intimacy of some of these stories. And there are times when a writer has to really demonstrate discretion. In other words, not everything that you learn is suitable and appropriate for public consumption. When I teach students about, when they ask, like, what are the things you need to do to be a good nonfiction writer, to me, empathy is right at the top of the list. I'm assuming you'll learn how to write, but that's a skill set. You can't teach someone empathy. You can't teach humility. You can't teach compassion. The reason those things are important is because a lot of times people in their lives, none of us are perfect, right? We all have warts in certain places, and we know where they are better than anyone. And when someone drops their guard enough to let you see the wart, or warts, plural, they need to know that you're not going to cut the wart and make them bleed in front of the public. And so that is the thing that I think, for me, actually going to law school and working in some of the things that I did before I was in writing have helped me tremendously as a journalist, because when I walk into a room to interview somebody, I mean, the last thing that I want to do with anybody is be judgmental.
Having read all 16 of your books, this one 3 times, I see some recurring themes in your books. You write about underdogs a lot, and Robert Kraft was certainly an underdog, but goodness usually prevails. That empathy comes through that you have for the people you write about. Kraft was most certainly an underdog in the NFL. What drew you to this story? I mean, the success is easy to say, I think, to say, writing about a 20-year success in the greatest team in the NFL, but I'm going to think it's more than that from knowing you.
The attraction to the story initially actually was more simply about this franchise was greater than all the rest. I wanted to know why and understand how they built a machine that is, it's a machine that's clearly run by humans, but how did they build it so well It's like the perfect mousetrap. Like, how did they build it? And then once they built it, how did they sustain it for so long? That was really the entry point for me. But the attraction once I got in, because I didn't know Kraft was an underdog when I started this. I didn't learn that, and I learned it very early, but I didn't know it when I started. And that would have been extra attraction for me. That would have, from a magnetic standpoint, would have pulled me there even faster. That to me was just, once I realized I knew Brady was, because his story is a little more known. 199th draft choice, 6th round, overlooked by everybody. That's kind of out there. But Kraft is, in many ways, you could argue, was an even bigger underdog, and I had no idea about that when I started. I can just tell you that once I learned that, it had a big influence on the way I structured the narrative, particularly in the first third of the book, the first 100 pages especially, because I think people, this is not unique to Americans, but certainly in this country, we gravitate to stories like that because it has that romantic element of sort of an American dream element to it. A young, poor Jewish kid in the suburbs of Boston who's being raised by a father who doesn't know anything about sports, doesn't have a TV, doesn't have a car, and young Bobby Kraft is all about sports, and so there were so many things working against him, and I love that part of the story.
Robert Kraft is a man of faith. We learned that. And I think, again, we talked about the themes, the recurring themes, but character, trust, you already said, is something he had. And I want to talk a little bit about the culture that he built, because that's really, at the end of the day, the leadership machine that he built helped drive the mechanisms for this longevity. But he's a man of faith. He believes in culture with a capital C. In 1994, he meets Bledsoe's agent, Lee Steinberg, who is the famous Jerry Maguire of the movie, right? And Lee Steinberg gives him what I thought was an amazing insight, that what makes greatness is the quality of the organization. And he gives him one more piece of advice in that meeting, where he also tells him that he needs to listen. And Kraft takes these two things to heart. He wants to build a quality organization, and he wants to listen to people, which seems to be a skill he already has anyway. How did Kraft apply this advice to the organization he was building?
I love the fact that you brought up the Lee Steinberg anecdote, because when you talk about the quality of listening, here's how good of a listener Robert Kraft is. In the course of their meeting and discussing and getting acquainted and talking over a meal, at one point, olive spread was brought over to the dinner table, and Kraft noticed, he's observant, he noticed that Lee was eating a lot of olive spread, and he pointed it out, and Lee made the comment about how much he loves olive spread. And when that meeting was over on the East Coast, Steinberg flies home to Los Angeles, where he lives, and a couple days later on his front door was a big shipment of olive spread from Kraft. And that really struck Steinberg, like he remembered that little tiny comment and observation, which was insignificant in the scope of what they were talking about. But that is quintessential Robert Kraft, listening, observing, keenly picking up on little things that no one else notices. The reason that's so important is because in terms of Steinberg, who at the time was the most powerful agent in the game, and who represented Drew Bledsoe, that was so pivotal in showing Steinberg that this guy is different than everybody else. Because in all his years in dealing with owners all over the league, no one had ever done something like that with him. And so it goes really, to me, it goes to the heart of Kraft's methodology of doing business.
Well, it's also authentic.
It's authentic.
It's who he is. He didn't just say, I'm going to do this and I'll get over on Steinberg.
Right.
It comes from a different place.
Yes. It's who he is. And so, again, I would connect that to something. If we fast forward, what is it? That was in 95. If we fast forward more than 10 years, when Tom Brady is now won 3 Super Bowls, is the man in the NFL, but he's still, he's not married yet. He's not married to Giselle. He doesn't have children yet. He's not that guy yet. So he's still on the younger side, but he's won 3 Super Bowls. Robert Kraft takes him to Israel. It's Robert and his wife Myra. They invite Tom to take a week-long trip to the Holy Land with them. I thought to myself, who else forget the National Football League, in all of sports, the NBA, Major League Baseball, the National Hockey League, I couldn't think of another owner who would think to do something like that. And here's the thing, Kraft didn't think to do something like that. This is who he is. He does stuff like that all the time. He doesn't have to think about it. He's brought many players over the years. He brought me there while I was working on the book. And it was really helpful because as I was there, it helped me appreciate more what Brady experienced when he went there the first time, because I was experiencing it. And then when I interviewed Brady about it, and he talked about that, what it meant to him to have someone like Robert Kraft take him like a son on a trip to the Holy Land, I thought this is so much bigger than football. It's so much bigger than football. And that's why, to me, those stories are what, for a reader to get invested, it's not the game that's going to do that. It's this stuff.
There's so many hints along the way, and they all go to character, trust.
Right.
People. There's so many hints that this organization should have the culture to be able to do what they did, that it's not a surprise that they did it. 1997, Kraft and Parcells are having some relationship issues. When Parcells is leaving, he makes a comment to the press about it. It wasn't a power struggle. It's not about power. And you write that Kraft thinks to himself, of course it's about power. But you add something which I found fascinating. It's about power and trust.
Yeah.
Why was that important?
I think it was important because, unfortunately, due to the many factors which I outline in the book, Kraft couldn't trust Parcells. I mean, the possibility for restoring trust was long gone. And I think it was when Parcells said, kept trying to say it's not about power and control, it really was all about that. And I'm not saying that to be critical of Parcells, but I think as much as you might not want it to look like it's about that, it is about that, because Parcells had been in control for so long. He was used to being in control because he represented the old way of doing business in the NFL. He's the old guard, and he was the best. Kraft is really the new guard, and I think what was so fundamental in causing an early...
More egalitarian new guard? Is that, when you say new guard...
When I say new guard, what I mean is it's important to remember that Robert Kraft bought the New England Patriots as 2 fundamental changes were taking place in the NFL. One was the introduction of free agency, which did not exist prior to Kraft buying the team. And number 2, the league embracing a salary cap, which restricted and controlled how much money teams could spend. So teams in big markets like...
You couldn't just buy the best and hang on to them forever and control their lives anymore.
And Parcells got to the top under that model in New York. So big market teams like the Giants and the 49ers and the Cowboys, they could outspend everybody and get the best talent and dominate. Parcells won in that's the old guard. I think Kraft understood before he even bought the team that the business of football was going to change fundamentally with a salary cap and free agency. And so the analytics that they embraced and the things that they brought to the table, that's what I mean by the new guard. Jerry Jones was part of the new guard. There were these new owners who were coming in and who were appreciating the significance of these changes and how they were going to change the game. Parcells didn't see that, and he didn't understand that because he didn't grow up under that. Belichick, on the other hand, totally got that, and I think that is one of the reasons that Kraft wanted him as badly as he did to be his coach, because he appreciated the fact that Belichick had an analytical mind.
He was a data wonk.
He was a data wonk who recognized that there was a competitive advantage in the hands of a coach who understood the significance of the salary cap.
we get to Connecticut. And Connecticut is there rolling out the red carpet, offering the world to them. Our Governor Rowland at the time puts everything out there to ensure to Kraft that he will become a billionaire. And you wrote, but, quote, he made deals with people, Kraft. And the way Rowland operated made him feel uncomfortable. Trust and people, again, the theme. What's the significance of that story?
I think the significance of this story is that it is very possible, in fact likely, that the New England Patriots are based in Hartford, Connecticut, and for the last 20 years in all these Super Bowls, those Super Bowls and championships would have been won in Hartford and not in Foxborough, but for the inability of Governor Rowland to strike the kind of relationship of trust with Kraft that other people who've made successful deals with him were able to strike. Mel Karmazin at CBS, Lee Steinberg, the sports agent. You can go right down the line. There are a whole list of people who have made very big, substantial, game-changing deals with Kraft over the years, but those are people that formed a relationship of trust with him, or that he formed a relationship of trust with them. That never happened with Rowland. In the beginning, when Kraft appeared to be doing what Rowland wanted, Rowland was his best friend. But the minute that Kraft started asking legitimate questions about concerns in Hartford, environmental concerns about the land, the inability to, make the timeline, suddenly Rowland started acting like a petulant child. And it was important that happened, because that's what opened Kraft's eyes to, he's basically going to be a business partner. I mean, he's the chief executive officer of the state of Connecticut, and Kraft's the chief executive officer of the New England Patriots. There has to be a marriage there. And it needs to be a marriage that can be sustainable over the long haul.
And he doesn't choose to use to be Kraft, the successful businessman, to run over Rowland. He actually says, I'm not going to be able to do business with this person.
Right.
He goes back to Boston without the guarantee of being a billionaire that Rowland was going to make him. And even the sports writer McDonough, who he hadn't spoken to in 2 years, they had had a falling out. They had been best friends and had a falling out, writes about this man not giving up everything, but giving up an awful lot to bring the team back home. And that seems to be very, very significant.
The fact that Will McDonough, of all people, looked at what Kraft did in Connecticut and recognized it for what it was, and then praised him in the pages of the Boston Globe, and basically said, I don't know anybody else who would have done this. To me, that needs to be in the book, because that's a credit to McDonough. It took some humility on his part, and Will wasn't exactly known for humility, but he was here. It's like, where credit's due, I'm going to give Kraft his due. And I think, to Rowland, you go back to Rowland, it's interesting how, as a Connecticut native and a Connecticut resident, I was fascinated with the Connecticut chapter in this saga, because it's another pivotal moment. History could have changed. They were coming here. They really were coming here. They had notified all their season ticket holders that they were moving to Connecticut, but their season tickets, if you lived in Massachusetts or Maine or wherever, would be honored in the new stadium in Hartford. You don't write a letter like that unless you're really going.
Well, Belichick joins the Patriots, still pre-Brady. How is he different than Parcells or Carroll? When he's coming into this culture, they didn't make it in the culture. Why is he different all of a sudden?
Belichick is a disciple of Parcells, so he comes from that coaching tree, that genealogical tree. He is a Parcells guy, and in some ways they are similar, meaning they're difficult personalities, both of those guys. Pete Carroll is the easy guy to get along with. That's one of his great attributes, is he gets along with everybody. Parcells and Belichick are not that guy. But where Belichick is very different than Parcells is his approach to the game and the coaching. He's got a lot of his own uniqueness. And I think one of the things that Kraft saw in him, besides his analytical mind and all that, was he's a great teacher. And he got to witness that, because when Belichick was an assistant under Parcells in New England, Kraft would watch him, and the way the young players, the Lawyer Malloys, the Ty Laws, the Willie McGinnis, the Teddy Bruschi's, the way those guys responded to him as a teacher was something that Kraft had never seen before. he could communicate with these guys and get them to do anything. He could motivate them and educate. And that really stood out to Kraft. And so those were the things that, attracted him and made him think that this guy could be different. That proved to be right. I mean, in the beginning, it didn't look right because Belichick's first year in New England, he was 5-11. And his 4 years in Cleveland were losing years. He had one winning season in Cleveland, and then he comes and goes 5-11 in his first year in New England. And everybody, the media was all over Kraft for picking him. They thought it was a colossal disaster.
So Brady is drafted. Does the world change immediately? I mean, there's still a Bledsoe on the roster.
Yeah. No, it doesn't. And I think what's interesting there is this is one of the things, that innate ability that Belichick has, is to see talent or to see attributes in people that everyone else overlooks. It's why he drafted Julian Edelman. It's what got him to pick Rob Gronkowski. Think about it. Those three guys right there are arguably three greatest in the last 20 years. Belichick drafted all three of those guys. He saw things that everybody else either just missed entirely or didn't think was important. And I think in Brady, he saw things not only in the draft, but in his first year. He made a decision to keep him as a fourth string quarterback. Nobody has four quarterbacks on the 53-man roster.
Now that we've met Kraft, we've met Belichick and Brady, we see all of the key character observations that pull these three together, the kind of people they are, and why they have a 20-year run of success. But in Kraft, there's always a moral compass that seems to lead the team. And he says something very interesting at this point in the book, and I don't know if it's an admission or an observation, but he says he's still learning. And this is another theme that I think plays into the greatness of this organization. Kraft admits to always learning. Belichick is learning. And Brady says several times he continues to be a learner. He continues to learn the game.
Yeah. I think that this should be a frightening revelation to every other team in the NFL. For 20 years, the team that was the most dominant, that won the most, had their three key leaders, the quarterback, the coach, and the owner, who even after winning Super Bowl after Super Bowl after Super Bowl, kept telling themselves, I need to know more. I need to become better. I need to learn how to do my job better than I just did it. That's scary. Most teams are just trying to get one. These guys, after winning 4 and 5, were waking up literally the next day going, okay, what do we need to do to improve? To improve? What do we need to do to improve? How do you improve on 5 Super Bowls? But that's the mindset of those three guys. And I think what's so compelling about that is when your owner, coach, and quarterback have that mindset, and it's real, it's not fabricated, it's actually how they think, everybody else who works in the organization, not just the other 52 guys on the roster, not just the other 12 assistant coaches, but everybody in the organization, right down to the guys who sweep the floors and do security for the doors, know that in this system, everybody has to do their job near perfect, because that's the way things are done here. And I think that's the genius of those three. I think that's why we're never going to see another dynastic run like this in the NFL, ever, is because at the end of the day, it does come down to people, and you're never going to see another Brady, Belichick, and Kraft, and you're certainly never going to see them together.
We finally get back to that fateful game with Drew Bledsoe, and I have to ask the hypothetical question, which I know you've asked and you've thought about when you wrote the book. If Bledsoe doesn't get hit that night, get hit so drastically that night, is the secret sauce there? Does Tom Brady become a footnote or a successful quarterback for another team? But does this happen?
I have actually thought about that a lot, and I have come down to the conclusion that I think not, because of a couple of things. There is no way that Belichick could play Brady when the other quarterback is the highest paid player in the NFL. You just can't bench him. Belichick couldn't do that. The injury enabled him to do what he had wanted to do but couldn't do. And then the fact that Brady performed as well as he did is the second critical component. If Brady had played but played poorly, when Bledsoe came back, he would have resumed his spot. And again, history would have been different, because I think it's the combination of the injury and then the way that Tom performed in the void that changed history, because it gave Belichick the ability, when Bledsoe came back, to say, no, I'm going to stick with the guy who got us here because he's earned it. That was controversial. Kraft wasn't necessarily in favor of it, and every football critic was like...
Bledsoe wasn't in favor of it.
No, but I think that's what changed history, and I think had it not gone that way, I'm not sure that Brady would have got a chance, not only with this team, but with any other team. I mean, that's what makes it so remarkable when you think about moments. Mo Lewis hitting Bledsoe the way he did, just a little thing that Bledsoe did, the stutter step, instead of just running out of bounds. If he had just run out of bounds, history would have been different.
If he misses the if he misses the hit,
it's inches.
There's another part of this too, and it's not too small a note, that Bledsoe actually rises to the occasion, though. I mean, he gets over it, and he starts teaching Brady, right? I mean, he steps up to the plate.
He does, and I was so impressed with Drew, and one of the things I tried to really show people in the book without saying it was, if you look at the way this guy conducted himself, no one can really get in Drew's shoes. It's hard to imagine being the #1 quarterback in the NFL, the highest paid player in the league, and to have an unproven rookie take your job after all you've done for the franchise. Most people would be bitter, angry, and would divide the locker room. And if he had done those things, the locker room, if it was divided, there's no way the Patriots go on that magical run. He got behind Brady and became his greatest supporter on the team, which is it says something remarkable about who Drew is as a human being. And I think Patriots fans, should recognize his contribution to this dynasty is huge. It's just huge.
Yeah. But again, everything comes back to this culture, innate culture. It was in the DNA of the organization.
Yeah.
He was going to do that. He wasn't going to divide the locker room. This is a point where a reader of the Dynasty could say, okay, we've got here now, Tom Brady's quarterback, the rest is history. But we got to the point in the book where my favorite story out of the entire book, and I think illustrates the innovation part of the culture here, is a young quarterback, Tom Brady, is heading to a game. It's snowing. He's late for the game. And if he's late, he knows his coach might cut him. I mean, that's the structure of the game and the structure of this organization. And he is stuck in unbelievable traffic. And we find out there are some other players stuck there. He makes a decision on the field of traffic that he will make for the rest of his career on the field of football. Can you tell us about that story?
This is a great story. So it's not just any game. It's the last game played at Foxborough Stadium. It's the snow game against the Raiders at the end of the 2001 season. So this is Brady's first year starting for Bledsoe. Bledsoe's on the sideline. It's the same year the Jets' Mo Lewis hit. And now they're in the playoffs. They're playing the Raiders. And on the day of the game, a blizzard basically starts in New England right a few hours before the game is supposed to start. Brady lives very close to the stadium. He's driving there. He's got plenty of time. And then he hits this gridlock that was partly a result of weather, but it was really more a factor that everyone in New England knew this was going to be the last game in the history of the stadium. So everybody's getting there even earlier than normal, and it creates this ridiculous jam, and he can't get to the stadium. I love this because here's a moment where Tom Brady, who's a kid, he's a California kid who's never played in snow, is like, my gosh, what am I going to do? He calls a guy named Frank Mendez, who's the head of security for the Patriots. Frank's a retired state trooper who now works for the team. And for Frank Mendez, this is like the moment. This is like Frank Mendez's Super Bowl. He gets to solve the problem and get Brady the game. But what Brady does is it shows his mindset is when he's confronted with a problem, he's a solver. He figures it out, and he figures it out on the fly, which is what he does every play as a quarterback. He's great at the audible. He's great at looking at the defense, seeing where the problems are, knowing what to do, and then telling his teammates what they need to do, and his teammates respond. And in this moment, he gets Frank on the phone. Frank says, "Where are you?" Gets the directions. Stay there. Then a cop comes, gets Brady out of the traffic. Follow me. Brady starts following him in his yellow Jeep. Lights are on. Other players who are trapped in traffic panicked because they don't want to be late and face the wrath of Belichick. They don't know what to do. None of them thought to call Frank Mendez. But when they see Tom behind the police officer, they all go, oh. They get out of line and get behind Tom. And by the time Tom gets to the stadium parking lot, he's got a line of players behind him. They've all followed him to the game. And to me, this was such a great foreshadowing moment of what Tom Brady would become, a player that other players want to follow through a storm. Because the New England story, the dynasty, is all about overcoming huge hurdles and obstacles and prevailing in the end, and having a guy like Brady who can lead in difficult times. And so I thought that story was one of my favorite ones.
I have to ask at this point, I'd be irresponsible of me not to bring it up, and John Kovacs would probably tackle me if I don't bring up Spygate and Deflategate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, without Spygate, which is where absolutely the Patriots were wrong.
And caught,
right. Does Deflategate happen if Spygate doesn't happen? Or is it as important, or is it absorbed by the league? Does it happen without Spygate?
I don't think so. That doesn't mean that the Colts might not have tried to accuse the Patriots of something that night, but I don't think it would have ever materialized into what it became. I think that Spygate is a critical predicate to Deflategate. And the fact that they were caught, and when I say they, the players weren't caught in Spygate. The ownership wasn't caught in Spygate. Technically, Belichick wasn't even really caught. They had someone on the field who was doing it, who was under the jurisdiction of Belichick, because Belichick is responsible for all the staff and the coaches. And they did it, and they got caught, and they got penalized for it. And after that, there were a series of subsequent charges of cheating that were brought against this team. The much bigger one, in fact, the biggest one of all of them, was that they were accused of filming the Rams on the eve of the Super Bowl and filming their walkthrough. Now, if that happened, that is far more egregious and serious than filming signals from the Jets sideline during a game in the first week of the season. And certainly more serious than if someone had let some air out of some balls. That is the biggest charge ever levied against the Patriots, was that they altered the Super Bowl by cheating and filming them in the walkthrough. That turned out to be completely baseless. But when it was reported by the Boston Herald on the eve of the Super Bowl against the Giants, everybody ran with it. From ESPN to you name it, every outlet ran with it as a fact. When it was proven later, and I say proven because the Boston Herald would later acknowledge they got it wrong, there was no video, they never saw a video, nobody cites that anymore. Even today, former Rams still cling to the fact that they filmed them before the Super Bowl. So I bring that up to simply say this. Spygate is the critical predicate to Deflategate. It's what gives people the sense of belief that this could happen because they did it before.
You did something before, you must be guilty
Yeah.
now. 9 Super Bowl appearances in 20 years, 6 Super Bowl wins, more than any other team in Super Bowl history. You've written the book. What do you have to say to the haters?
I get it. I get it. It is hard. It's the beautiful thing about sports, right? Teams are little more than mirror reflections of us in our communities. It is why not just Americans, Europeans, Brazilians, in anywhere you go in the world, we take tremendous pride in our sports teams because they are reflections of us. And so when the Patriots dominate, New Englanders love it because it reflects us well, and everybody else resents it. I get that. But I think if you read the Dynasty, if nothing else, it's not going to convert people to become Patriots fans. But what it will do is basically say, I think, hey, now I understand why these guys are as good as they are. And I've had a lot of people reach out to me who root for other teams and say, I have to admit, I wish we had that owner. I wish Belichick coached our team. I wish we had Brady. They would love to root for these guys. They just need to change their uniforms.
I mean, it opened my eyes to again, talking about the culture of the team. You get how they did it. You get why they did it.
Yeah.
And you do learn to like these people.
Yeah.
A lot. Sean McManus wanted to be here today. He couldn't, but he sent me a question to ask you. Why haven't teams who now have all the advantages the Patriots have with analytics, scouting, etc., why haven't they been able to duplicate the success of the Patriots? No team has ever been this dominant for 2 decades. Is it Brady, Belichick, Kraft, or is it all three of them?
So Sean McManus has asked a great question, and no one has seen this team up close more than Sean over the last 25 years. I think the simple thing is this: you can't duplicate personality. Brady and Belichick and Kraft, their personalities have as much to do as anything of why this team has been so dominant. Brady's drive is not replicable. You can't fabricate that in another player. Belichick's mentality as a coach it can't be fabricated. And I think Kraft's approach, his leadership approach as an owner, it's not something you can teach someone else to do. You can't go recruit people to do these things. And that's I think the magic, the Shakespearean part of the Patriots dynasty is it's rooted in those 3 men and who they are as men. And that's the part that the Chiefs and the Jets and the Cowboys and the Steelers can't replicate. And to be honest with you, neither can the Patriots. You're not going to see this again. Not like this.
You wrote, and I quote, "It has been a lifetime thrill to write the book of the greatest football dynasty in the 100-year history of the NFL and the greatest sports dynasty of the modern era." How did you feel when the dynasty hit the bestseller list?
I felt a great burden when I was writing this book to write at a level that was worthy of the achievements of the organization. It gave me a sense of the kind of pressure that players probably feel when they sign a contract to play for this team, or when a new employee gets a job offer to come to New England. I felt that pressure as a writer. I've been writing for a long time. I'm pretty good at what I do, but it was an intimidating feeling that actually drove my writing. And so at the end, the New York Times bestseller list, it signals something, whether it's fair or not. That's sort of one of the standards that we judge books by. And I felt like if this book didn't make the list, I would have failed. And so I can't control the list. That's the thing.
It shows that people outside of Foxborough are reading it.
Yeah.
So we've come to that kind of time where Elm Street Books needs to open and sell some of these books today. I need to kind of end this. But you are traveling around the state at the moment.
Yes.
Tirelessly, endlessly, I know this. Visiting independent bookstores, working with them to help them sell books. Why are you spending so much time supporting independent bookstores, and why should we?
So COVID has delivered a devastating blow to independent bookstores across America. A lot of them have closed and will never reopen. Amazon, on the other hand, has done tremendously well during the COVID outbreak. I am a big proponent of libraries and independent bookstores. And in New England in particular, New England is rich with independent bookstores. All 6 New England states have an abundance of privately owned, small community bookstores. I know many of them very well. Elm Street Books has hosted me for most of the books that I've published. Elm Street Books has brought me here. Books on the Common in Ridgefield, Barrett Bookstore in Darien, the Hickory Stick in Washington Depot, Bank Square Books in Mystic, R.J. Julia in Madison. These are stores that have looked out for writers like me for years. And so when COVID blocked us writers from being able to come to these stores, to do book signings, to meet readers, to greet customers, that was a blow to all of us. And so I was looking for a way as a writer to be able to come to these stores in the era of COVID and do something that was medically responsible. In other words, completely respectful of the seriousness of COVID, of the customers who shop at these stores, and the people who work at these stores trying to sell books. There has to be a way to do this. And I couldn't think of a... Elm Street Books was actually instrumental in helping us figure this out, because they took a chance and hosted me sitting outside of this store on a Saturday afternoon signing books and wearing a mask, and everybody else wearing masks. And we thought, we can do this. And what better place to do it in than New England, where we have cold weather in the fall and the winter, where football fans who root for this team are used to the snow and the cold. We should do our book signings outside, where we can social distance, we can wear masks, we cannot be contained inside, and we can sell books. And so to me, it's like, I'm actually looking forward to not just going around Connecticut, but we're going to Vermont in December. I mean, we could be sitting outside in the snow. I'm like, it's a great thing.
It is a great thing. We love our outdoors in New England, and we love our bookstores. You quote Henry Wadsworth Longfellow in the book. Great is the art of beginning, but greater the art is of ending. Can you indulge me one more time and just read from the epilogue this paragraph?
Yes, because, and then I'll admit something. Together they created a golden era of football that started in the year of 9/11 terror attacks and continued for 2 decades. If the Patriots dynasty had behaved like its football predecessors in Green Bay, Pittsburgh, and San Francisco, the run in Foxborough would have ended much sooner, perhaps as early as 2010 or 11. But Kraft's biggest achievement as an owner was keeping Belichick and Brady together for so long. They needed each other to reach heights that had previously seemed unimaginable. For Belichick and Brady, the 2018 season was their magnum opus. When they walked off the stage in Atlanta in February 2019 with their 6th Lombardi trophy, it was the football equivalent of the Beatles leaving the studio after recording Abbey Road. Although the Fab Four would end up releasing one additional record and didn't officially break up until the following year, their final musical masterpiece was behind them when they crossed the street on August 8, 1969. I have to tell you that when I wrote that was it. Like, that's the end. I literally was playing Abbey Road, writing that passage, and I will admit to you, I had tears in my eyes because I was at the end, and I didn't want to be.
Thank you so much for joining us here today at Elm Street Books in New Canaan. Thank you for sharing the story of the Dynasty with us. Thank you for all the books you've written. And for everybody else, I ask that you please go to your local bookstore, wherever you may be, and buy some stocking stuffers. This one will need an extra large stocking, but buy one. Independent bookstores are part of the fabric of our community. They are certainly the intellectual heart and soul of our community, and we need to continue to do everything we can to support them. Jeff, thank you again for today.
Thank you. Thank you.